On the one hand, it's pretty hilarious and fun that a super rich white American windbag would be the person to disrupt a fusty, glacially paced sport like cricket, pissing off a bunch of distinguished British people in the process.
But on the other hand, it's all too perfect and predictable that this super rich windbag ended up being, in the words of one writer, a garden variety sociopath and also an evil doofus behind a $7 billion Ponzi scheme.
If you'd like to earn CPE credit for listening to this episode, visit earmarkcpe.com. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Continuing education has never been so easy. And now, on to the episode.
This is Oh My Fraud, a true crime podcast where the criminals commit economic homicide instead of plain old homicide. I'm Caleb Newquist.
And I'm Greg Kyte.
Greg, I have a housekeeping item before we get into the show. A correction, to be precise.
Oh, well, that is very exciting because A, I don't believe we've ever done a correction before, and B, I also have a correction that we need to get out there to the people.
How delightful. Okay, I'll go first, and I'll make this pretty quick. In episode 49 about the Roslyn School District, I said that my celebrity doppelganger, Anthony Rapp, I said that he played Roger in the musical Rent, and that is wrong. He played Mark Cohen, and I got a nice email from a listener correcting me about that, and he said there were likely some apoplectic theater nerds out there reacting to this error. So I'm happy to take full responsibility for the mistake and set the record straight for those theater nerds. And it's also in the show notes. So there you go.
There you go, theater nerds. The other correction was actually brought to our attention by listener Clayton, who informed us that in episode 53, we referred to the DJ with the big mouse head as Modest Mouse when it is, in fact, Dead Mouse. Clearly, our ignorance with regard to both musical theater and electronic house music rivals our ignorance of United States and world geography.
Indeed. So, Greg, moving on.
I'm just glad we got that off our chest.
Yeah, I feel better, don't you?
Yeah, we don't want angry people listening to the podcast.
That's exactly right.
Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Greg, I am curious. Do you have any experience with offshore banking?
I mean, I've got like 10 different accounts in various Bahamian islands, but apart from that, none at all.
Okay.
No, actually, really, I don't have any experience whatsoever with, like, I barely even understand offshore banking. And as a matter of fact, preparing for this episode was probably, I still feel like I have a very light grasp on what it is.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was joking. I have never had an offshore bank account. I have, as far as anyone knows, which is
of course,
which is kind of the whole point of offshore bank accounts. Is the whole thing is like it's a place to keep your money secret. So if
Indeed.
I did have experience with offshore banking, I sure as hell wouldn't tell you or our listening audience that I had offshore bank accounts. And as far as I know, I don't know anyone with offshore bank accounts. But then again, maybe that's just the offshore bank accounts doing what they're supposed to do by making sure I don't know that those people have offshore bank accounts.
Right. That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. So, but if I was to try to like pinpoint the closest brush that I possibly had with offshore banking, back in the late 1990s, I got a job as a car salesman. Yeah, I was selling Mitsubishis and Subarus at Barber Brothers Mitsubishi Subaru in Orem, Utah. The owner of the dealership, he was a friend of mine, also part of the leadership team at the church that I was going to. I believe he was an elder of our church. That's how I knew him, was through church. He gave me the job. He was clearly making plenty of money through his car dealership, and he and his family would regularly vacation in the Cayman Islands, which is well known for offshore banking. And it was hard for me not to wonder if this respectable elder at my church was also maybe doing something shady. But if he was probably paying 10% on it. So that's cool. But
of course.
But on the other hand, Maybe he's just going because the Cayman Islands, they're a beautiful tropical island paradise.
Indeed. All right. This episode is about a small town Texas guy who became a billionaire building an offshore banking empire. He lived large, told a lot of stories, and had a famous last name, Stanford.
As in Stanford and Son.
No. Robert Allen Stanford grew up in Mahia, Texas, population 6,893, according to the 2020 census. Mahia is located in Limestone County. That's about an hour and a half south of Dallas and 45 minutes east of Waco. And as we said earlier, our geography, particularly Texas geography, can be suspect, but I'm feeling pretty good about Mahia. I think we got it. But still, if you want to verify,
we got our little...
Please
cartography tools out to make sure we got that one right.
Right. Yeah. So a couple of items of note about Mahia, Texas. Yes, it is pronounced Mahia, named after Jose Antonio Mahia, a Mexican hero for the Republic of Texas Army during the Texas Revolution.
And for our listeners, it's spelled Mexia, but it's pronounced Mahia.
Mahia. Yeah. And this pronunciation issue has been enough of a problem over the years that the town's motto is, and I am not kidding, the town's motto is a great place no matter how you pronounce it.
There you go.
I mean, kudos, Mahia.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
Well done.
Yep.
I want the t-shirt.
But back to Allen Stanford. His family was of some renown in Mahia. His grandfather, Lotus Stanford, founded an insurance company in 1932, Depression era.
Yeah.
And that helped start building his family fortune. Allen's father, James, worked with Lotus in the insurance business and later became mayor of Mahia and served on its city council. Allen's mother, Sammy, meanwhile, came from a working class family and didn't meet the expectations of her mother-in-law at all. So, for those of you listening, in similar circumstances.
Right. Those of you who have mothers-in-law.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Ergo, Allen's parents divorced when he was 9. And his mother moved to Fort Worth, where Allen graduated from high school. Okay. So from there, the legend of Allen Stanford, as told by Allen Stanford, begins at Baylor University, where he majored in finance and played football on a scholarship. Stanford started his first business, a gym, in Waco. He expanded the business too quickly, however, and it went bankrupt in 1982. 2 years later, he and his wife filed for bankruptcy with more than $13 million in debt and only $229,000 in assets, which is quite a spread, if I may say. So, Stanford and his wife, little money trouble, but after declaring bankruptcy over the next decade, he would turn things around. He got into business with his dad, James, who was then running the family insurance and real estate business. And that business was called Stanford Financial Group. And when the price of oil crashed in the 1980s, Texas real estate, as many people know, Texas real estate followed, and the Stanfords bought up a lot of distressed property. Prices eventually recovered, and the Stanfords made a fortune, by all accounts, hundreds of millions of dollars. And Allen took over from his dad when James retired in 1993. So during these heady years, Allen had spent a lot of time in the Caribbean. I think Caribbean.
Let's go with Caribbean. The only time you say Caribbean is if you're at Disneyland or Disney World.
Oh.
Other than that, it's the Caribbean.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, he's spending time in the Caribbean, recruiting investors and customers for his business. And he was able to raise so much money that he opted to recruit a friend from Baylor, a guy by the name of Jim Davis. And Jim joined the business, put in a bunch of money, and together they started Guardian International Bank on the island of Montserrat. Am I saying that right?
I'm going to say you are, but also it might be French, and I don't know how to pronounce any French words.
Yes. Then in that case, it might be Montserrat.
Montserrat.
Yeah.
That's my best guess.
Should we go hard American pronunciation?
Yeah, I say let's go hard American. Montserrat.
Okay.
You can put a little Texas on it. Here in the island of Montserrat.
That's totally how he would say it.
I think so. I think that's how Allen Stanford would say it.
Yes. Anyway, so they started Guardian International Bank on the island of Montserrat in 1985. Now, how do a couple of good old boys, American dudes, start an offshore bank in Montserrat? I got no fucking idea.
No
Greg,
clue.
do you have any idea?
Zero idea how you start an offshore bank in a foreign country.
But you know what? They did it.
Just accept it. They did the thing.
Now, but according to a 2009 Texas Monthly profile on Stanford, quote, what happened next is subject of some debate.
And this is so wild. I love this so much.
It's fantastic. Anytime that you have to preface something with that is subject of debate.
Yeah.
It's going to be exciting.
Yes.
So here we go. Quote, perhaps Montserrat changed its banking laws, or Stanford drew the attention of the IRS, or he got into a fight over a woman, or a hurricane wiped out much of the island, or maybe all of those things happened. Ian Moncrieff Scott, a financial writer who has covered Caribbean corruption for several decades, claims that the British government was asked by the Montserrat authorities to force him to leave, which it did. Whatever the case, Stanford arrived in Antigua in 1991. This time, he named the bank after himself. Yes, my friends, Stanford International Bank was just getting started.
Antigua and Sir Allen were made for each other, wrote Mimi Schwartz in Texas Monthly. One writer who was steeped in Antiguan corruption told her, you are used to Texas-style chicanery, which can be both big and bold, but you've never seen anything like Stanford's influence in Antigua. So, Allen Stanford, his approach was pretty simple, because he did this in Montserrat too, did it again in Antigua. He ingratiated himself with the local people. In this case, it was Antigua's politicians, did them favors, and then asked for big favors in return. This gave him near total control over many things in the country, and he would make extravagant shows of generosity, which also further indebted people to him. For example, Caleb,
pretty classic approach, I would say, wouldn't you, Greg?
I don't know, because I've never tried to take over a island in the Caribbean before. Financially or otherwise,
when you put it that way, then maybe there's not.
But if you're trying to gain influence over people, you ingratiate your people, you make them feel indebted to you, and then you're like,
butter them up.
I need favors back, and it's sort of social power plays. So Indeed. In that case, absolutely. Here's one example of his chicanery, as Mimi Schwartz called it. In 1996, Antigua's then prime minister, his name was Lester Byrd, asked Stanford to clean up the country's banking laws. No big deal. Just asking some guy,
asking a banker to clean up the banking rules.
I mean, and somebody who has had just vast experience by having one other bank that got him driven out of the country. So ask that guy. It's like, hey, can you tighten these up for us? And he's like, cool, I can. And then they're like, right, it'd be my pleasure. And then Prime Minister Lester Byrd also asked Allen Stanford if he could lobby the United States for a better relationship for Antigua. And Allen Stanford was more than happy to do both, clean up the banking laws and help lobby for a better relationship with Antigua. A 2009 New Yorker article written by writer Alec Wilkinson reported that Stanford Financial Group spent nearly $5 million on lobbying the United States over 10 years on issues around money laundering, financial services, and banking. All stuff that plays nicely into somebody who runs his own offshore bank. By the year 2000, Stanford International Bank had over $800 million in assets, and it had taken over the Bank of Antigua, which was pretty perfect for Allen Stanford because that basically made him the only lender in town, or to put it a bit more precisely, to put a little finer point on it, he was the only lender in the country. So again, Caleb,
that's an enviable position to be in, wouldn't you say, Greg?
Yeah. Well, also, it puts you in a pretty powerful position because
absolutely,
if you're the only lender in the country, people need loans. So everybody's kind of going to be polishing your butt to make sure that you'll give them the loans, and they're literally indebted to you. So
yes,
that's not a bad place to be for somebody seeking some leverage in the world. But it's interesting too, because the accounts that we read show that Stanford had this kind of mythological quality to him in Antigua. One story goes that he airlifted a stigmatic priest to the U.S. for medical treatment. So to many people in Antigua, Allen Stanford was just this super rich, super shady guy who liked to throw his weight and his money around. In the New Yorker article that we talked about before, for example, there's a story of a writer who allegedly depicted Stanford as a money launderer involved in the drug trade. Stanford sued the writer, settled the case out of court, and the newspaper agreed to, quote, publish a front page apology, to print twice as many copies of the issue as usual, and to deliver 100 copies of it to Stanford and to pay for his legal fees. That's just rubbing their nose in it.
That is
print twice. You're not going to sell them, but you have to print twice as many copies, and then you just got to eat all of those extra, except for 100 of those, which you need to personally deliver to me and put on my desk along with my morning latte. And you know what I get from Starbucks. That's what it seems like, a very Devil Wears Prada sort of move.
Yeah. I mean, it's, let's give credit where credit's due. It seems like Allen Stanford knew how to enjoy some retribution.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's another way to say it. Another way to say it.
What were you going to say?
He was a dick. Yeah.
Yes, he's either a connoisseur of the fine art of retribution or a fucking dickhead.
Right. Exactly. So another thing that was notable, possibly most notable from this period in the Allen Stanford saga, at least for our purposes, is when Stanford International Bank paid over $3 million to the Drug Enforcement Agency because a Mexican drug cartel was laundering money through its account. So no wonder.
I hate it when that happens.
I hate it when you
that
just
happens.
settled a lawsuit for somebody saying that you were a money launderer and involved with drug cartels, and then immediately after that you have to pay $3 million because you're laundering money for drug cartels. But at least you got those 100 newspapers.
Hey, unbeknownst to me, Greg Kyte, as I'm speaking as Allen Stanford.
Right. Exactly. I didn't know. Somehow that got through the cracks. There were whispers of more money laundering going on at Stanford's offshore bank. During this time, but nothing ever came of all of that. But all this controversy did nothing to stop the further endearment of Allen Stanford to the island of Antigua. On November 1st of 2006, Allen Stanford was appointed Knight Commander of the Order of the Nation of Antigua and Barbuda by the Antiguan government. And after that, naturally, he insisted that people refer to him as Sir Allen.
Let me tell you something about this guy, Allen Stanford. He liked being rich. And I mean, as far as billionaires go, he wasn't near the top. Okay. He peaked on the Forbes list in 2008 at 205 with 2.2 billion. But I have to say, and there's no official ranking on this, but he has got to be top 10, top 20 when it comes to billionaire showboats. Here are several examples of that. First, he parked his yacht, Sea Eagle, right next to the Antigua airport, quote, so that he could fly in and be on the water in minutes.
Because, when you got to be on a boat, important. You got to be on a boat.
Can't stand being on land. Another example, he had one wife, at least 2 girlfriends, and 6 kids between all of them. It's indeterminate how many girlfriends. But in any case, that is it was as complicated as you might imagine.
Right.
According to Texas Monthly, when Stanford's wife visited Antigua, she was allowed to go only certain places and was always escorted by security guards, ostensibly to protect her from kidnapping, but also to prevent an encounter with one of his girlfriends.
Perfect. That's a solid relationship right there. I mean, he's from Texas, but out here in Utah, people with one wife and at least 2 girlfriends, they're known as polygamists.
Indeed.
So, and we did a whole episode on them.
We sure did.
Yeah.
Allen Stanford had an untold number of private jets, but at least 6, according to the New Yorker article. The writer Alec Wilkinson reported in his story that he got a tour of Stanford's hangar and that there were, quote, 2 small jets and one the size of a commercial liner, all of them looking as if they had just been polished. The floor of the hangar looked as clean as that of an operating room. Several planes were elsewhere. The attendant said, Stanford, he added, had the largest private jet fleet in the world.
Which that's a huge showboat thing. I think I've mentioned on the podcast
that's
before.
Super showboaty.
That my ex-wife's uncle was a private pilot for
yes,
the Oracle guy. What's the name?
Larry Ellison.
Yeah.
Guy.
Yeah.
Super rich guy.
But didn't, as far as I know, I mean, he maybe had a couple of private jets. And I'll tell you what, like my ex-wife's uncle told me just the finances involved with owning a private jet, where it's like, it's not just that it costs like what, $7 million, $9 million, something to buy the jet, but then you're paying a large amount of that annually just to maintain it and to house it and to have a staff to fly it. And so like, it's not just the initial outlay. It's a money pit that you're consistently throwing stuff into. Just having one, and this guy had the largest private jet fleet in the world, and he was number 205. Yeah.
Yep.
Bad choices, Sir Allen Stanford, if that is your real name.
And I have to say, as far as billionaire showboats are concerned, Larry Ellison is up there. He's no slouch.
Yeah, true. Right. Exactly. Yeah. But also he was, at one point, I don't think anymore, but at one point he was number 3 on that list, not number 205. So
correct. He had, like, I think Larry Ellison probably at his peak could buy and sell Allen Stanford dozens of times over.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, let's not get caught up in the numbers. Anyway, what else we got? Oh,
comparison is the what's the quote? Comparison kills joy. There's something like that, and we don't need to kill Allen Stanford's joy by comparing him to Larry Ellison.
That's right. What else we got? Oh, his mansion on St. Croix. He lived on St. Croix, mind you. I don't think, from all I could tell, he did not live in Antigua. His house was actually on St. Croix.
Nice.
And he also owned an airline. He owned an airline. Okay. A newspaper and a couple of restaurants as well. But
and a couple of restaurants. Just a couple Taco Bell franchises. Nobody.
Yeah, I mean, what did he do? Did he just have the whole restaurant to himself? Like, I wonder what he did.
Probably.
It's like, hey, boys, make sure the place is cleared out. I'm coming in for dinner.
Right.
And make sure my wife doesn't. I'm bringing a girlfriend, so make sure my wife. Don't let my wife in. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Only DoorDash for the missus tonight.
Yeah. All right. But I have to say, the most hilarious and also shrewd bit of lavishness was that Stanford reportedly spent $65 to $70 million on cricket in the Caribbean. Yes, cricket, a global sport with billions of fans that most Americans would be shocked to know even existed.
Wait, they'd be shocked to know that the billions of fans existed, or that the game of cricket existed?
Probably both.
But cricket's one of those games that, I'm sure people who have never been familiarized with American football watch the game and go, these rules are the weird, I don't understand any
They don't
of
make
this.
any sense.
And we just know it because we've been watching it since we were kids.
Yes,
but cricket feels like that to me, where it's like,
yes,
I don't know anything that's happening.
All right. Stanford first got into cricket around 2005, his main interest being for its marketing potential.
Which is so weird because, again, we go, what marketing potential? No one watches cricket, but we're just thinking that's a very American-centric view of it.
Indeed. Yeah. Marketing potential, and mostly this is marketing potential for himself.
Right.
So he assembled the best players from the Caribbean on his team called the Stanford Superstars.
Which, again, beautiful. It's not the Antigua Superstars. It's not the Superstars of the Caribbean, but it's the Stanford Superstars. Super classy.
Yeah. Now, if you're not familiar with cricket, and I'm betting you're not.
I am not.
And our listeners aren't either, because the majority, our international audience is very small.
Growing all the time.
Growing,
yes.
Right. But I have to say, it's mostly in English-speaking countries. So
true.
Britain, Australia, these are places where people like cricket. So
true.
Apologies to you fans who are yelling at us. I'm sure we will be issuing corrections on your behalf in the very near future.
Yes.
Now, for those not familiar with cricket, a typical test match, which is the classic version of the game, can last up to 5 days. You heard that right, listeners who've literally never given this sport a second thought. Matches can last up to 5 days.
One entire work week.
Yeah.
Crazy.
That's a nice way of putting it.
You going to say I have to come into work on a test match?
Not everyone loved this aspect of cricket. So in 2002, a newer, shorter version was introduced called 2020. Now, a typical 2020 match is over in about 2.5 hours. And so its popularity spread rather quickly, especially in India, where there are more cricket fans than there are people in Great Britain altogether. Stanford threw his support behind this newer, much shorter version of the game. And this made him a hero in Antigua and really across the Caribbean. And it made him a giant villain in the UK.
Gotcha. So the UK was like, didn't we just kick you out? Wait, now you're doing this?
The guy?
What?
Wait.
The same guy?
Banking
what the
guy?
Hell?
Is in cricket now?
Huh?
Anyway, Stanford's cricket obsession and hilariously brazen self-promotion reached its peak when he organized a match between the English national team and the Stanford Superstars. The winners got 20 million. The losers got nothing. When the match was announced, he even landed in a gold leaf trimmed helicopter at Lord's Cricket Ground with the 20 million in a plexiglass case to promote the event.
So he didn't have a gold escalator that he was in a full-on gold helicopter with a glass box with $20 million of cash inside. That's
Showboat.
Exactly.
Showboat.
Case in point. Check in, mate. Showboat. Take that, Larry Ellison.
The match occurred in November 2008, and I'll spare you the suspense. The Stanford Superstars won big, and the English were not happy about it.
Stanford International Bank's number one product was its certificates of deposit. Yep, CDs, the same thing that your grandparents might have given you for your birthday when you were a kid. Did your grandparents give you any CDs?
My grandparents, they were not exactly, I wouldn't describe them as affluent. So
my grandparents were more treasury notes.
Treasury bonds?
Like a $10 where it's like, here's a $10 treasury bond, and if you cash this in 5 years, it'll be worth $10.50. And it's like, okay, I'm cashing it in tomorrow. So Stanford's, but here's the thing. Stanford CDs weren't any ordinary CDs. Stanford CDs were based in Antigua, and they paid 3 to 4% more than any CD paid in the U.S.
Ooh.
The bank had been offering these CDs for more than a decade. By 2007, when it started a big expansion, and around this time, the bank started pushing its advisors to sell a lot more of these CDs than its other products. And the advisors were told that they would make 30% more selling CDs at Stanford than at their previous jobs. So first off, we're saying these CDs have a reasonably high interest rate compared to other CDs. And then the other thing is it's like, and they got a huge commission for the brokers who are selling them. So those are some pretty powerful financial instruments, that being the case. The bank, Stanford International Bank, would put on competitions, paying individuals and teams big bonuses for selling the most CDs. The added bonus was that these products were good for customers because they were safe. Stanford CDs could be cashed in at any time, which is weird. Another thing that differentiated them from normal certificates of deposit. Then, around the time he peaked on the Forbes billionaires list, Stanford was also named World Finance Magazine's Man of the Year. And in an interview for that award, here's how Sir Allen Stanford described his philosophy on his business. He says, quote, "The Stanford philosophy for investing is based on diversification across global regions, countries, markets, asset classes, products, and sectors, with the assumption that risk can be minimized while maximizing return." Now, if you hear that and think that's quite a blustery word salad of nonsense, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's totally a blustery word salad of nonsense. Or it's just something that, like, a first-year finance, if you're like, how would you address it? You know, it's like your finance professor gives you the dumb project of saying, write your acceptance speech for World Finance Magazine's the year, and how you got that. And they'd be like, oh, well, I guess we'd be diversifying across global regions, countries, markets, asset classes, projects, and sectors. Is that it? Sounds good.
Well, we simultaneously minimizing risk and maximizing returns.
Right. That sounds good. Okay, just send it in. Yeah. Does that sound like ChatGPT wrote it? No. Good. Send it.
Yeah.
Well,
yep.
Despite these conspicuous hallmarks of success, some other things around Stanford's empire didn't feel quite right, including to some insiders of the company. The Texas Monthly article that we've been talking about features a couple of Stanford financial advisors named Charlie Rawl and Mark Tidwell, and they had lots of questions. Here's a passage from the piece explaining some of their worries. It says, why, for instance, was the auditor of a bank with a supposed $8 billion in assets a one-man firm located over a hair salon in London? When Tidwell asked permission to notify clients who had invested in the CD about forms they were supposed to submit to the IRS, he was told by a supervisor to forget about it because the company didn't give tax advice. Sometime later, Tidwell and Rawl learned that Stanford didn't issue 1099 forms to clients so that they could report the value of their investment income to the IRS. Collecting that data was supposedly the client's responsibility. But it's not.
Does that strike you as weird?
It does. Well, yes, no, but yes. But
no?
Well, here's the thing. 1099s are just show the IRS how much to tax you, not so much you to make sure that you're not underreporting your income. So I see it both ways, because I do see, on the one hand, they at least better be getting statements to people saying how much.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, but 1099,
it's not the client's responsibility to chase them down for those things.
Right. Exactly. Now, here's the only thing that I'm saying, though, is I get plenty of 1099s every year, and I just keep track of them and add them up just to verify that my records that I've been keeping separately from them are accurate. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm saying? So So I kind of see it from that perspective, but I also go, no. The IRS requires you as a institution to file 1099. So I don't know how they got around it from that side of things.
Right. Yeah.
So, but
not good.
Regardless,
yes,
basic tax documentation and compliance documents seem like table stakes for any bank. So, I mean, we all have banking relationships, and we all get far too much more tax documentation than we probably need, more documentation in general than we probably need from our banks. Mm-hmm. So yeah, red flag for sure. A couple more things that would probably concern anyone who was paying attention. First, in May of 2005, the SEC wanted information on the bank's CD program. Management told everyone that the request was routine, so no big deal. But then they also told assistants and advisors to remove any information that wasn't on Stanford International Bank letterhead from their clients' files, all clients' notes and interoffice emails and so on. So they had a real Enron-style shred party at the old Stanford International Bank just prior. Yeah, like it's very much an Enron style. Right before the SEC shows up, let's just shred everything that's sketchy.
Yeah, very standard operating procedure.
Which is very sketchy. And also, around the same time, clients started complaining that a mutual fund program's returns were not matching the returns claimed in the company's pitch books. A consultant even came in and recommended that Stanford, quote, admit that the returns that they were claiming prior to January 2006 were incorrect. All bets are off as far as accuracy goes, he said, and no one can even verify it. That's pretty damning.
Not good.
Not good at all. But all that happened as a result of all of this was some comically small fines imposed by the SEC and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, aka FINRA, but nothing internally changed. Tidwell and Rawl were nervous, and so they got themselves and their clients out by the end of 2007. But because they'd raised concerns internally for Stanford and his empire, the bank claimed that Tidwell and Rawl had been fired when in fact they had quit, and the bank sued Tidwell and Rawl for $600,000 in advances that they claimed Tidwell and Rawl needed to repay to the bank. But then the SEC subpoenaed Rawl and Tidwell in July of 2008, and around the same time, 2007, 2008, Stanford was boasting about his business's resilience to the Great Recession that we all remember was going on at that time. Stanford was quoted as saying, "We haven't been caught up in all that subprime mortgage fiasco. We're very bullish on making a lot of money in the next 20 years.
In January 2009, just 2 months after the Stanford Superstars defeated the English national team in that goddamn spectacle of a cricket match, Allen Stanford, his CFO Jim Davis, and the firm's chief investment officer Laura Pendergast Holt reported to employees that the company had just received a, quote, capital infusion of $541 million. When the Madoff scandal broke, which was just around the same time, some investors asked about any connection, but Stanford reassured them that they had no exposure. But the SEC was still knocking on the door in January 2009 with subpoenas. Stanford and Davis refused to cooperate, but sent Pendergast Holt and another executive to testify about the bank's operations. One lawyer reported back to Stanford executives that the commission, quote, wanted to be reassured that the bank is real, the CDs are real, that the money is actually invested as described in our documents, and that client funds in CDs are safe and secure.
Right. So it's kind of like, hey, so you say you're a bank, but do you do anything that the banks do? Like,
do you do any banking things?
Listen, I'm super high right now. Are you real? Is any of this real?
What's real here?
Yeah.
Not great.
No, not at all.
And if you think that sounds bad, then you're going to love this. In February 2009, one of the bank's executives asked Jim Davis about the $541 million capital injection that they supposedly received in November. When they dug into it, the only thing that showed up was a transfer of real estate worth $88 million, quote, from one Stanford company to another. That, Craig Kyte, in the business is known as a intercompany transaction.
Right.
And they are sometimes not legitimate.
Yeah. It is
worth
a way
looking closer. If you look at such things, then you should take another look.
Right. And it's a way to inject capital, but it's also a way to remove capital from your other business. So
right.
Yeah, even if it's not suspect, it's not a quality play. It's not improving your overall position at all. So it's just rearranging the deck chairs.
You got it. As the SEC continued to apply pressure, More people within the bank kept asking questions, and eventually Davis and Pendergast Holt explained that the assets were held in 3 tiers, and it was this third tier that the majority of assets, nearly $8 billion, were held. But what they actually showed wasn't anything close to $8 billion. Pendergast Holt could only substantiate $3 billion in assets and a $1.6 billion loan to shareholder. That shareholder, of course, was Sir Allen Stanford. On February 17th, 2009, federal agents showed up to Stanford offices in Texas, Mississippi, and Tennessee and accused Stanford of running a massive ongoing fraud.
As the media began to look into the mythic story of Sir Allen Stanford, everything began to fall apart. Remember the Baylor football scholarship? Baylor had no record of it. Stanford also claimed that his business started all the way back to his grandfather's insurance company during the Depression, but that wasn't true either. His grandfather sold that business. And we haven't mentioned up to this point, but Allen Stanford boasted for many years that he was actually related to the founder of Stanford University, Leland Stanford, and Allen Stanford claimed to have genealogy records to prove it. Also, according to The Guardian, he went so far as to fund the restoration of Leland Stanford's mansion in Sacramento. Stanford University said otherwise, saying they had no record of any connection and sued Allen Stanford for trademark infringement as he was using his name in marketing virtually everywhere. Oh, and the claim that Stanford had no ties to Madoff, that was all bullshit too. There was exposure to Madoff investments and, quote, most of the financial figures were made up.
Yeah. The Madoff stuff, I think virtually all of it was made up.
Right.
Which is...
Right.
Anyway, don't use that.
Oh, but, no big deal, because remember those super safe, super liquid CDs?
Yep.
Yeah. The bank had mostly invested that money into real estate and private equity, which is pretty much the exact opposite of a liquid investment. $8 billion in assets were unaccounted for, and when the authorities showed up to Stanford offices in February of 2009, Allen Stanford was also unaccounted for. It turned, he disappeared. Poof. He was also a close-up magician. But he turned up a couple days later at a girlfriend's house near Fredericksburg, Virginia, where he was served with civil legal papers filed by the SEC. Allen had tried to flee the country on the 17th, but when he tried to pay for his private flight to Antigua with a credit card, he got turned down because they only accepted wire transfers. And apparently he just didn't have that kind of scratch, just, not liquid.
Darn.
So
hate it when that happens.
You're trying to flee the country and they don't accept your credit card. Bullshit. Come on.
It's a Capital One venture card.
Right,
guys.
Right. That's what's in my wallet.
Sam Jackson, everybody. Yeah. Come on. Jennifer Garner. What's the problem?
How can it not be legit? Allen Stanford was arrested on June 18th, 2009 by the FBI. He was charged in a Houston courtroom a week later with 7 counts of wire fraud, 10 counts of mail fraud, conspiracy to obstruct an investigation for the SEC, obstruction of an investigation by the SEC, and conspiracy to commit money laundering.
You know what? Did we just double up on obstruction?
No, because he was charged with conspiracy to obstruct, and he was also charged with actually obstruct. So it's like, hey guys, let's obstruct, and then they actually did it. So that's 2 different crimes, man.
Yeah.
So he got charged with both. They brought the hammer down on this.
The hammer down.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Like most of what surrounded Allen Stanford, everything that followed was also a spectacle. So, Caleb, you and I are going to go through a rundown of what happened after his arrest.
Yes, we are. Okay. On June 25th, 2009, Allen Stanford pleaded not guilty to the charges.
On August 27, 2009, he was admitted to the hospital after complaining about a racing heart during his transfer from a prison to the courthouse to a hearing where his lawyer was asking to withdraw from his case.
On September 26, 2009, he was hospitalized again after being beaten by a fellow inmate.
In January 2011, the judge in his case ruled that Stanford was unfit to stand trial because of a raging addiction to anti-anxiety medication. The judge still deemed Stanford a flight risk, however, and he was not released from custody, and he was ordered to undergo treatment for his addiction so that he could stand trial.
In May 2011, 7 of the charges against Stanford were dropped.
In November of 2011, Stanford's attorneys argued that he was still unfit to stand trial due to amnesia sustained from his injuries.
But then, in December 2011, the judge found Stanford fit to stand trial after he spent months weaning off the medication he was taking.
Stanford's trial actually finally began. On January 24th, 2012, he was convicted after a 6-week trial. Prosecutors sought a 230-year sentence, the maximum allowable under law. This was 80 years more than Bernie Madoff's sentence, which was only 150 years.
Ultimately, Stanford was sentenced to 110 years in prison on June 14th, 2012, and ordered to forfeit $5.9 billion.
At his sentencing, Stanford spoke for the first time during the proceedings and said that he never swindled anyone and that his company was the victim of Gestapo tactics by government regulators.
Stanford filed a 299-page brief appealing his conviction in September 2014 with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. It was denied.
In 2016, Stanford gave a jailhouse interview to the BBC where he maintained his innocence, repeatedly said that his conviction will be thrown out and that he will walk out of prison one day. Here's a quote from Stanford. He says, "I know it's going to happen, so it's not a dream. It's reality. It's right around the corner. So yes, I think about it very, very often, and I have a smile on my face, and I know it's going to happen, and I feel very confident it's going to happen very, very soon." I think Donald Trump is going to say that exact same speech from jail during an interview with the BBC sometime very soon.
I think you're right. Yeah. The interview is little sidebar. That interview is quite something. There's a link in the show notes. Just how delusional he is about the whole thing. At another point, he said, quote, "I lived very modestly in terms of how I could have lived. I could go on, but we don't have time. Please read that interview. It is something." The final thing that we'll just note here with the criminal justice element is that Stanford wasn't the only person who went down. Jim Davis, the CFO, Laura Pendergast Holt, the chief investment officer, Gilbert T. Lopez Jr., the chief accounting officer, Mark J. Kurt, the global controller. They were all convicted of or pleaded guilty to criminal charges as well, and they all were sentenced to prison time. Lopez and Kurt are still serving their sentences, while Davis and Pendergast Holt have been released.
As for the victims in this case, there were thousands, around 18,000 to be exact, according to a 2019 CNBC article. The final tally on Stanford's Ponzi scheme put it at over $7 billion that he had been running for 20 years. Recent reporting has stated that recovery of assets for the victims has been slow and of limited success. In February of 2023, the Stanford receiver, that's the person trying to recover the money, settled with TD Bank for $1.2 billion, bringing the reported recoveries to $1.6 billion, which when you do the math, that's less than 25 cents recovered for every dollar lost. Yeah, not a good return on your investment. The Allen Stanford case has been compared, obviously, to Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme a lot. They happened around the same time. Remember, Madoff was revealed in December 2008. Stanford's was in February 2009. They were the two largest investment frauds, and by that, I mean the largest Ponzi schemes in history. But while Madoff's scheme dwarfed Stanford's was arguably further reaching and more complex due to the convoluted international structure to it all. And as far as anyone can tell, that was by design. Mimi Schwartz wrote in that Texas Monthly article that the international press made Stanford out to be a yahoo, a flamboyant Texas, a high-flying Texas billionaire. But he was, in fact, a shrewd, calculating man who had given a lifetime of thought to his enterprise. As for the rest of his lifetime, Allen Stanford will do all his thinking inside U.S. Penitentiary Coleman II. The Bureau of Prison Records show his release date will be March of 2103.
Okay, Greg, did we learn anything?
Yeah, there's one thing that really stuck out to me about this case, and again, it's sort of the compare and contrast between, well, I guess not just between Stanford's Ponzi scheme and Madoff's Ponzi scheme, but also just Ponzi schemes in general, because here's what we know. If we know anything about Ponzi schemes, the biggest red flag is that the people who are perpetrating them promise these ridiculously high rates of return.
Yep.
And as a matter of fact, I looked it up to make sure that I had the facts right. Charles Ponzi, after whom Ponzi schemes were named, he had a Ponzi scheme that related to like postage stamps. And he was promising people that they could get a 50% return within a few months. So not just a 50% annual return, but just probably at least 100% annual return if you annualized it. So if you're talking about a rate that's clearly too good to be true, Charles Ponzi's Ponzi scheme was that. But we've talked about this before on prior episodes that Madoff was different with his Ponzi scheme because he promised a 10.5% annual return. Right. And he was able to hit that for like decades. And so a 10.5% annual return, that's not astronomical. That's not that in and of itself, not a red flag. But hitting that consistently for decades, that's what's on the far bounds of statistically possible. So again, kind of makes it a too good to be true thing when you look at it as a whole. But here's what I think really sets apart Stanford's Ponzi scheme is, if you remember his CDs, he was just claiming that you get a certificate of deposit, and what you're getting with me, you're going to get 3 to 4% better rate than you would with any CD that you get in the United States. Now, I looked at the rates for CDs between 1991, which is when he started his bank I think that's when he started the bank in Montserrat. And was that Montserrat or was that?
No, he started that's when he moved to Antigua.
That's when he moved. Okay. So let's say that's when Stanford International Bank started.
Yes.
So, and the CDs were the primary, financial instrument of Stanford International Bank.
Yes.
Mm-hmm, so the CD rates from 1991 to 2023 were at the highest were like 6.5%. If you have 3 to 4% on top of that, you're saying at the very top, the highest rate he was ever given was the Madoff rate. But then also you get down to, there was a period of time where CDs were trash and were given like 0.1% interest.
Right.
And so you go, okay, so if you're given 3% above that, that's still, at that time, that was unheard of. Yeah, I mean, you remember when it's like, if you own a savings account, you're an idiot, kind of thing.
Yeah,
because it's not making you any money at all. So, if he's doing 3%, that's what, like, his bottom was 3%, his top was 10.5%. So here's what makes that all interesting to me is if you're claiming that you're giving a 50% return within months, because the whole idea is you're not really investing it, you're just getting new investors and paying the old ones what you promised them with new money. So if you're Charles Ponzi, you have to come up with a ton of new investors to pay off what you promised to the old investors. You with me?
I am.
If you're Madoff, you're not given a 50% return within months, you're given a 10.5% annual return. You still need a bunch of investors to pay off the old investors, but a whole lot less. Now, and which is why purportedly Madoff was able to perpetuate his fraud for so long. But now look at Stanford. He has to only give returns of 3% to 10% at the highest. He doesn't need nearly as many new investors as these other Ponzi schemes to be able to keep it going. But he was making this huge push to just sell them. This is what you need to sell. Go out and get more money. So I think that's a very interesting thing, because again, I wouldn't say that the rates that he was flaunting for his instruments were in the red flag territory, because again, you're talking about like everybody goes, okay, I understand CDs here in the United States, but somebody says, hey, get one from this bank in Antigua, a tax haven, and you can get 3 to 4% more. And you go, oh, okay, I guess that kind of makes sense, because if they don't have to pay taxes, whatever, maybe that, okay. And it's not 15%, it's not 18%, it's not 25%, it's maybe 6%. And it's like, okay, all right, I can buy that. So you don't have the same red flag that you have with other Ponzi schemes. I thought that for me, that was, I don't know, can I say that was the coolest thing about this Ponzi scheme?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of trying not to attract attention, you have to say, like, that is the thing that Allen Stanford, that kind of cuts against his brand, right? Like, he was doing things, even though the CD rates were beating, were far exceeding US rates.
Right.
And they were probably marketing those pretty aggressively. It wasn't as though he was showing some restraint in terms of like what he promised to return to investors.
Yeah. But again, I think that goes back to the quote from the Texas Monthly article that he was in fact a very shrewd, very calculating man, because again, on the one hand, like you said, it shows restraint that he was like, oh yeah, on my CDs, you're going to get 3% return instead of 0.1%. But then the other thing is, you know what the difference is in degrees of magnitude between 0.1% and 3%?
Yeah.
I mean, do the math. It's a lot. I'm not going to do it right now.
Cool. Couple of things that I have on my mind about this. As of this recording, it has been 15 years this month since the fraud was revealed, and there's still litigation going on trying to recover funds for victims.
Yeah.
So that is insane to me. And it just goes to show how kind of the long lasting impact that fraud, and especially a large fraud like this one, can have on the victims. There are people out there to this day, right now, trying to get their money back.
Right.
So that's rough. The other thing I learned was from around the time of Stanford's sentencing, there's this article in the New York Times about how judges around that time were seeing these big financial crimes, and they were, this notion of economic homicide. And so this devastating impact on victims was a considerable factor in the sentences imposed on people like Stanford and Bernie Madoff and some others. And that one's in the show notes as well. It's a good read. It's from 15 years ago. So it's definitely a snapshot in time of like what was going on, because there were a lot of financial crimes being revealed at that time.
Yeah.
Mortgage crisis and Ponzi schemes and all kinds of stuff. So, pretty interesting stuff. The other thing.
So let me ask you a question, because I did not read the article about financial or economic homicide.
Homicide.
What the idea being that you've ruined someone's life.
Yes,
because you stole. Which makes sense, because that was the big heartbreaking thing about even about Enron, and also obviously about Madoff, was you've got these people whose life savings or their entire retirement accounts they just vanished. And if you're already retired, you're not going to be able to get another job to replenish that money or to make ends meet. So is that kind of the idea, that it's like you did this fraud and it ruined a lot of people, it destroyed a lot of people's lives?
It essentially destroyed people's lives. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yep. That's
economic homicide.
Precisely the premise. And I don't know if there's anything official about that. I don't think you'd have to do some more digging to see if there's actual, if that's an accepted kind of premise or notion or within the legal world. I didn't get that sense, but the impact of the crimes are essentially as if you are murdering that person in an economic sense.
Well, I mean, and which makes sense heavy. Because it's not hard to do the thought experiment of like, okay,
oh no,
you're so hey Caleb, you're 70 years old, you've long since retired. You're so irrelevant now because you're 70. So and oops, now you've got nothing. Your entire nest egg is gone. Here's your $2,000 a month Social Security payment. So good luck.
Yeah, you're getting a job. You're getting a job wherever you can.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Maybe you couldn't even get a job. Listen. Maybe not. We've talked about this. I'm 51 and I'm getting my hip replaced in the near future. So I think when I'm 71,
good times.
I'm going to be, this guy's in a wheelchair at best. So
no, you're going to have a brand new hip. You'll have your hip will only be 20 years old.
Yeah. I'll be in. Okay. So
right now you're on a 50-year-old hip, Greg.
Is that it? Okay. That's true. That's true. Okay. I like your positivity. I'm saying that I will be decrepit and that even greeting at Walmart would be a challenge for me.
Yeah. Right.
So
yeah. Anyway, the other thing about this story, which I knew going in, but was kind of underscored again as I kind of revisited it, was that this story had quite a bit of coverage, despite it being overshadowed by the Madoff story.
Yeah,
because they were essentially happening concurrently.
Right.
So, I guess for the listeners who are just interested in this story, there is a lot more out there. Like we weren't able to get into all the details of this story. We covered a lot of them, but like there's other stuff out there that are less critical to the kind of the big beats of the story. It's just, I don't know. It's a fascinating case.
Yeah.
So hopefully we did it justice.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
I'm going to say unequivocally we did it justice. Well, that's it for this episode. And remember, offshore banking is shady enough. No need to go around doing actual shady stuff and ruining it for everybody else.
And also remember, only a Texas blowhard would launder dirty money through cricket. Run your dodgy plunder through rugby or hurling or Batoshi instead.
Yeah. Do that.
You familiar with Batoshi?
None of that.
Look that one up? Please do. Please look that up.
Did you mean curling instead of hurling?
Nope.
Okay.
Hurling is a sport too.
Also not familiar with that in the least.
Yeah. Check out Batoshi.
Okay.
Please.
That's a type of martial arts, right?
No. Okay. I mean, maybe, except it involves 150 people playing an extremely violent version of Capture the Flag.
Oh, well, so it does sound a little bit like martial arts.
Maybe without the elegance.
Okay.
I'm telling you, man. I am telling you, find some YouTube.
I think
Batoshi.
that's how I'm going to get myself to sleep tonight is
great.
Just watching Batoshi videos on YouTube.
Yeah. Please report back.
If you want to drop us a line, or if you would like us to send you a curated recommendation of a Batoshi video, send us an email at ohmyfraud@earmarkcpe.com. Caleb, where can people find you out there in the internet wilderness?
LinkedIn /Caleb Newquist.
That's all you said. LinkedIn. How about
LinkedIn?
Also LinkedIn.
Yes.
Just LinkedIn. Our names. Just LinkedIn. Our names. You can do that. Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn. Greg Kyte, CPA.
Oh My Fraud is written by Greg Kyte and myself. Our producer is Zach Frank. Rate, review, subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If you listen on Earmark, you will, or you can. I don't say you will. If you don't take the quiz, you won't get the CPE.
No.
Am I right, Greg?
You should. You should get CPE credit.
You should get CPE if you listen on Earmark.
Yeah.
You do all the necessary things.
It's pretty easy.
Yeah. So, if you want some CPE, listen to Earmark. Otherwise, non-accountants, whoever you are, fans of the show, join us next time for more avarice, swindlers, and scams from stories that will make you say,
"Oh my fraud."